So it's Monday, and I'm doing an interview with the Guyana Chronicle, Miss Marshall.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to record this and send it to her. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Peters. Thank you so much for entertaining me.
Well, I'm not
Yesterday,
sure.
the Camp Street prison was set ablaze for the second time in little over a year. When you got the news, what was your immediate reaction, given the fact that you would have worked with this during the period of the Commission of Inquiry in 2016?
Well, when I first heard the news, I thought I was dreaming, actually, because the way I heard the news is I was on Facebook, and I can see the images of the fire at the prison, and so I started, like most other people, on Sunday afternoon. I started following the news and trying to contact people that work at the prisons in Georgetown to get an update as to the situation.
Were you able to get back to anybody?
Yes, I was being briefed right at the top. So I heard that two persons were injured at the particular time. Two prison officers were taken to the hospital, and with chop wounds and gunshot wounds. And then later on, I heard that one of them was my assistant, in Wickham. The first report I got is that he was chopped, and then the second report I got that he was both chopped and shot, and that he's going to be in the theater. And then sometime afterwards, I heard that he passed away.
Yeah.
I was not happy at all. I mean, I was quite upset and sad as to, personally, the demise of Mr. Wickham, who I cared a lot, who I cared greatly about, and secondly, about the situation that unfolded at that prison. What happened at the prison yesterday should not have happened, because last May we did Operation Restore Order to bring back some form of sanity to that place. Right? And a lot of weapons were removed and a lot of other contraband. So it seems like they should have had another large-scale operation at that prison, and something should have been done, not only in respect to an operation, but in terms of the recommendations that the Commission of Inquiry would have made to the President of the Republic of Guyana.
The recommendations, I know you would have put forward a number of recommendations, and the Commission also had recommendations. They spoke to the issue accommodation space, creating more space. They talk about the expansion of the Masterminded prison, the Lusignan prison, the Bridgam prison. They also spoke about the conditions and the length of the remand period. Do you think enough was done on the part of government and the security, on the part of government and the authorities, the judicial system? Do you think it was too short of a period? It occurred, a year.
No, I think my perspective is that the prison officers, from the director down to the assistant prison warden or assistant prison officer, they have very difficult jobs in very, very difficult circumstances, right? And they spoke about recommendations to make corrections in Guyana better. Gladwin Samuels, the current director, wrote several memorandums speaking to the situation in the prison where you had these wood buildings, and these wood buildings being a fire safety hazard, right? That was spoken about, and we made submissions in respect to that. That those places, and I think it might have been quoted in the Guyana Chronicle as well. Those places was historic relics, and that needed to be removed. And I sort of resurrected because I had copies of my video copies of my oral submissions. So I posted it on Facebook because, I mean, quite frankly, that was a major consideration. One, that prisoners stop being housed in those wood buildings, and that a brick prison be built to house those prisoners, right? The second thing is that the proper personal protective equipment be provided to the prison officers. Even yesterday, I was very disappointed at that I didn't see the appropriate personal protective equipment on the officers that were dealing with the situation. The third thing that we spoke about is we spoke about resources in terms of human resources. And then we spoke fourthly about the salaries and benefits that are provided to prison officers. And all those were addressed in Justice Patterson's report.
Good. If we could talk about you made mention of the building of brick prison. This year, allocations were made for the expansion of the Masterminded prison. Let's deal with the Masterminded prison, because I'm sure about that. Do you think, the contracts were awarded, don't you think that was maybe a step in the right direction, or how provisions have to be made before the brick prison could have been built? I mean, they didn't take that necessarily into a short term. They weren't going to do that as a short term plan, maybe a long term plan. But how could you have prevented this?
Well, I mean, in terms of about speaking about the brick prison, certainly we have, in this current context, we have less than 24 hours for the prisoners to be housed elsewhere, because obviously the entire Georgetown prison is unusable. And so we speak about contingency planning. The Commission of Inquiry brought down a report the first week in June of 2016. This is July of 2017, and at least, we had a jail whose capacity it is to hold 600 prisoners. We're holding 1,018 prisoners, even more than the amount that was at the prison when the disturbance occurred in 2016. So, pardon?
I said that's true. That's true.
Yes. So certainly, any indication that there were steps to ease the overcrowding is vacuous in when you look at the numbers in March of 2016 versus the number on July 9th of 2017. Secondly, the staff to inmate ratio, would have been a problematic issue. And the director of prisons, Mr. Samuel, spoke about that last evening at his press conference with the Joint Services head. But in terms of the brick prison, all necessary steps should have been taken to open that brick prison that was still under construction at Bricktown. My understanding is that prison was still under operation, under construction, and that prisoners weren't housed in it.
Okay.
Right. So that's a significant problem that you had that brick prison still not operational in terms of housing inmates. And then the issue of in terms of that, you're dealing with a brick prison a wood prison that is vulnerable, and yet you have condemned people, persons who are condemned to death for very, very serious offenses. The Bartica massacre was not a cup of tea, and you have these men who are extremely dangerous, not only to the prisoners, but to the prison officers themselves and society as a whole. These men were condemned to death, and you have them in a wood building. Those men should not have been in that wood prison.
So, with regards to the, so most obviously they should have been transferred at least to the Masterminded prison.
Or at least that brick prison that's on the John Street side should have been operational to house them. They should not have had the influence that they had to be able to set in train that crescendo of events that resulted in the demise of Mr. Wickham and the complete guttering of that prison.
Now, you spoke about a ratio, the amount of the amount of prisoners per prison officer. Do you think that maybe the security forces could have put a mechanism in place to have maybe ranks from the police force trained to deal with, to be inside, to reduce the burden or the pressure faced by the prison officers, given what occurred in 2016? Do you think such a system could have been put in place, or no?
No, that's a very good question, because remember last year in 2016 when the riot occurred, there was a half unit of the tactical services unit that was always on standby in the administrative building at the Georgetown prison. I cannot tell you the state of affairs in 2017, whether or not the half riot unit was still in place at the Georgetown prison, and whether there was a half riot unit stationed in the administrative building at the time this situation occurred. That would have to be a question answered by the Assistant Commissioner of Operations, Mr. Clifton Hickens, and the Director, Mr. Samuels. I haven't received the information about that, but at least in 2016, that is how it was. So whether or not the police were at the prison, that has to be answered by the persons on the ground in Guyana. But what I could say is that certainly to have the officers understaffed and in a position of danger that Mr. Wickham and Mr. Trim and the others would face is quite sad. I'm very sad. I'm very sad. I cried all night last night, and I got to tell you that I did, because Mr. Wickham is somebody that I know personally and worked with very, very closely. So we're not talking about a prison officer who is divorced from the person who is speaking to you. We're talking about a prison officer who has worked very closely with me and whose soul I sort of know. So I'm in a period of mourning, and I'm sad, and I'm quite upset that entire prison was demolished. I mean, we have to ask ourselves very, very hard questions, very, very difficult questions, because we should not give prisoners that power to do that. And secondly, even as the prisoners were evacuated, the prisoners were taken to the officers' sports club, and hours later that club was gutted by a fire. So obviously we have to ask ourselves very difficult questions, very, very hard questions, and we have to look internally and externally, because it's our prison, it's our system.
Mr. Peters, what recommendations you would give to the government, to the authorities, given the situation what it is now? I know that they're now doing, there's now cases are currently being heard for petty crime and violent crimes. and persons are going to be placed on bail. I think that process would have been initiated already. But what are your recommendations to this government, to the security forces going forward?
Well, I think the security forces know what they have to do. I think the government knows what it has to do, and I think the judiciary knows what it has to do. I mean, the Minister of Public Security, the Honorable Mr. Ranjitan, spoke last night, and he was as frustrated as I am and other people are that persons smoking a joint, persons with petty criminal activities, are being incarcerated at a Georgetown prison because these magistrates and these judges seem to be divorced from the reality of the prison themselves. Perhaps we need to put them in the prisons and have them spend a week there, or have their children spend a week there, so they can appreciate the burdens and the sort of risk that comes with overcrowding. So it's not a case. This government knows what it needs to do, and I can tell you that the ministry is properly run. It's run by a permanent secretary who is a very, very able public servant, and I mean, the minister, as a lawyer and a human rights lawyer, that appreciates and understands what he needs to do. So I have no quarrel with the job that the Ministry of Public Security is doing. What I have a quarrel with is the resource allocations, and I think the minister spoke about that last night. He says, well, I can ask for whatever I need to ask for, but I have to go to cabinet and make the submissions and get those submissions approved. And if it's not approved, my hands are tied. There's nothing I could do. So, that's one aspect of resource allocation. And obviously this government have to take it seriously, because we spoke about those wood prisons, and I spoke about it in my submissions in May. And it came to pass yesterday that exactly what we spoke about in May of 2016 occurred yesterday, which is sad and could have been probably avoided, right? That's one. Number two, in terms of the judiciary has to get its act together. They have to remember, I think sometimes the judiciary is far removed from the reality of society, that you just don't, not because you have the power to throw someone in jail, you throw them in jail. There has to be other means to deal with petty criminals, especially people who are not incorrigible or people who are not beyond redemption. Right? You toss in a whole bunch of people who are petty criminals with the likes of Mr. Williams and the rest of them. Obviously, they'll try to get them involved in gangs and in terms of making them much violent criminals. And you saw that from some of the videos that emerged from inside of the prison yesterday, because there are videos where the inmates actually filmed themselves speaking about burning down the prison and speaking about what gangs in the prison they came from. So, I mean, it's a very, very difficult task. It's a challenge, and the judiciary has to pull its weight too and understand that there are alternatives to imprisonment. And Guyana doesn't have the resources to deal with the overcrowded situation that the officers found themselves in yesterday.
Additionally, I know that the prison officer, we haven't heard of any prisoner losing his life. There were no casualties when it comes to the prisoners compared to 2016 incident. Do you think that was somewhat of an improvement? Maybe do you think that the SOPs were being followed?
Well, it certainly spoke to the it certainly speaks to the professionalism of the prison officers, right? That's number one. It also speaks to the leadership. Leadership comes from the top. So it shows that the leadership of the prison service were right in tune with the standard operating procedures, right in tune with what they needed to do to evacuate those prisoners safely and humanely out of that inferno that was taking place in there. And those officers must be commended under these difficult circumstances.
Okay. So I must say thanks for entertaining my questions. You're going to send the recording via Gmail? Is that possible? Or
I'm gonna send it right through to your Facebook right now. I'm gonna send you the
Facebook.
link.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So that was an interview I just did with the Guyana Chronicle. They wanted to hear what I had to say on the situation at the Camp Street prison that is no longer a prison.